Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Clay, and with me today is Mathieu Lavoie. Mathieu, do you want to introduce yourself very briefly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Eric. I'm Mathieu, co-founder and CTO of Flare. Happy to be here with Eric to discuss a little bit of the ransomware, and we have with us as well someone in research as well behind the curtain to help you answer some of the question. If unfortunately we don't have the question right now, I'm sure that person will be super helpful as well. So, yep. So we are three of us, even though we're two on the screen, and like usual, we're happy to be here. Like it's been a while since Eric and I haven't presented together, and we're glad to have you with us.
Yes. So I will tell you in advance. I've told Mathieu I'm going to completely ambush him with questions. So the whole strategy here is I sent him the slide deck 10 minutes before the event started, and then I'll ask him questions about it throughout because that's completely fair to Mathieu. So we're going to have a good time though. So we'll
Absolutely.
start with ransomware and rhubarb. So why did I pick this title for the slide deck? So there's actually this really funny thing where in Russian, the word for rhubarb is one letter off from the word for revenue. And so we actually, when we translated it, for whatever reason, when we were translating some of the content, Google actually translated it as rhubarb. And so we had this like rhubarb was all littered throughout all of these translations from Russian into English. And so that's the origin of the ransomware and rhubarb title. So let's start with talking about some overall trends in ransomware. Double and triple extortion ransomware increased more than 100% year over year between 2022 and 2023. And I really think that this trend can't be overstated. Mathieu, do you mind giving our audience just a brief talk on what double and triple extortion ransomware is and how it's different than kind of what you might call traditional ransomware?
Yeah, I think the classification we do in like is a pretty broad way of classifying is like the first extortion is usually like stealing the data or like getting the data out. The second like extortion is like publishing the data and like creating additional pressure and letting like the data out there to let the rest of like the rest of the world expose the data of the company. And triple extortion is basically all other technique that can put even more pressure on the organization. You can think about like we see groups that are actually targeting not necessarily the information of the company, but also targeting the employee and the personal information of the employee. So it's kind of a shifting to be more like as a problem in order to like it's not like just a technical problem, it's become an HR problem. We've seen as well like disruption of operation. So as well, that's something we can see. We've seen as well um, like basically exposing the file listing like and just not the data. So if there's any mention of like third party or business partner of the victim, it's easier for them to get the information based on the file listing that they were somewhat indirectly impacted. So any different approach that you can see that is aimed to put more pressure on the victim in order to negotiate a ransom will fall in what we call the triple extortion approach.
Yes, thank you, Mathieu. And I should mention before I go any further, so this was originally the original idea for this was an AMA, but there's actually been some very interesting developments in the ransomware ecosystem in the past 2 weeks. So we decided to do a slide deck and then have an AMA if there are questions. Um, so the next thing I have here is companies and critical infrastructure within NATO countries were more targeted than countries outside of NATO. So if you think of NATO, which is essentially Western Europe plus the United States by itself accounted for about a third of ransomware victims, and about a third of all initial access broker postings are selling access to companies within the United States. And then if you look at kind of the broader ecosystem, more than 50 to even 60% of all IAB postings and ransomware attacks target Western Europe and the United States. So there is quite a bit of original research that we've done on this that you can find in our research center. Now, one of the other really interesting things is this was not an explosion in growth where you just have hundreds and hundreds of ransomware providers attacking an organization. This was really in large part driven by three top ransomware groups, which are Lockbit, Clop, and Alphvm. And then there are a
Black
few smaller, newer. Sorry,
Alvi or Black Cat is also kind
Black
of
Hat.
one.
Yeah. So there are a few smaller new groups that I will briefly mention, but this huge increase in attacks was really driven by a few providers who and their affiliate networks, which we'll also talk about here in a few minutes. New small ransomware groups have emerged. My two favorites are Slug Ransomware and Going Insane. They have amazing branding from a marketing perspective, although their motives are not necessarily great. It's interesting because we haven't seen a whole. That was strange. we haven't seen a whole lot of kind of like medium-sized ransomware groups. Things tend to be concentrated with particularly large groups and then with a few small newer groups. And out of a sample of more, and this is going to become relevant later on in the conversation, but out of a sample where we looked at over 450 initial access broker posts, which I'll cover in a minute, and 3,000 ransomware attacks, only one affected a country in the coalition of independent states, which is essentially Russia and some of the former Soviet states that are aligned with Russia. So Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, etc. I think there's about 12 of them. So, Matthew, do you want to tell us a little bit about what is a ransomware affiliate?
Yeah, so the concept of ransomware affiliates is, and it's kind of an interesting take, and we've seen it happening like probably like I'd say 2-3 years ago in the ecosystem. I think the one that really kind of set the stone of like the biggest affiliate program is still Lockbit, and the goal is the group figured out that they unfortunately developed some kind of expertise to negotiate a ransom and the payment, and they had so much opportunity of like infecting other company, but they didn't have only so much time to actually negotiate the ransom, and like it so what they decided to do is basically afloat the infection part and only focus on negotiating the ransom. So instead of like getting more people in the company, they took more like an approach where any freelancer can actually buy the software as a service. The software as a service that is offered by the ransom group. So basically, like subscribe to the tool set, do some infection, gets into company, get the data out. They also provide, like Lockbit especially, also provide any type of like infrastructure to get the data out or actually save the data from that perspective. And also when the infection is done, then this is kind of the Lockbit people that will actually negotiate the ransom and get the payment out of it. And there's a commission, there's a split of revenue between the affiliate and actually the what we can call the freelance that actually did the infection.
Yes, and I think it's interesting that that split of the revenue and the cost is actually an area that these groups compete over. So they'll try to be cheaper than the other groups, and there's kind of different incentive structures to try to get affiliates, because having good affiliates means you're going to get more more successful infections that result in a successful negotiation. You can see here on the left we have a message from Black Cat. So this is where the FBI actually compromised part of Black Cat's infrastructure last month, and Black Cat declared war on essentially the United States and Western Europe. So one of the other interesting things I think I would add about ransomware groups is that you'll often see, at least some groups will say, well, we're, hospitals, nuclear power plants, like really critical infrastructure is off limits. And so in the case of Black Hat, in response to the FBI takedown, they've said there's no limits for their affiliates anymore. So affiliates can attack whatever type of company that they want to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Usually, affiliate, there's some rule related to the affiliate. In that case, they kind of remove the rules. Also, in the interesting, like the fact that Black Hat was compromised by law enforcement did affect the trust of the affiliate within the ransomware group, and we see as well like other groups such as Lockbit that actually had some kind of like promotion in order to welcome the affiliate from Black Hat into their own affiliate network. So that's also things that we've seen happening into following the seizure of the domains by the law enforcement. So that's also kind of like in this all affiliate programs have like pros and like are basically competing against the one or the other. Some will take less commission, some will take more, some will have like additional tooling, some will be more like on your own, like not necessarily providing toolings or minimal tooling. So it's kind of a special ecosystem to look into, where also when you see some action or actually newsworthy event that happening, you see all kind of movement between the affiliate as well. So you kind of see like a close circle of affiliate that are kind of moving one to the other.
So it's almost like how these large software companies compete for the top developers. You could say the large ransomware groups, like the kind of maybe the dominant 3 or 4, compete for the best affiliates, because getting the best affiliates means they'll get more commission from the attacks.
Unfortunately, yes.
So there's a few rules, and this is going to be very relevant for the next few slides. But there's a few rules that ransomware affiliates and groups typically have to abide by. So as I said, don't hit hospitals, medical. This is actually usually a rule that's enforced by the ransomware provider on the affiliates because they don't want to draw too much attention to themselves. They don't want to cause such a large issue that it becomes an international incident, and then they end up with law enforcement coming after them in their own country. Don't scam other threat actors. You see, this is a pretty important one. So a lot of trading goes on these dark web forums like XSS, Exploit, etc. And typically, scamming people will get you banned on those forums. And so you'll see threat actors regularly get banned. Don't post junk and fake breaches. And finally, and this is a really important one, don't target companies in the coalition of independent states. And this is going back to that point I made earlier, where if you look at initial access broker postings and ransomware events, we have a sample size of close to 3,500. Only one out of 3,500 affected a company in the coalition of independent states. And that would be this interesting incident with ansecurity.ru. So last week, Security, and I will take a minute to mention, I worked on this with Tammy Harper from Cypher, who worked on the research report on this that you can read on our blog. So she did a great job, and it was a real pleasure working with her. But last week, there was an event where on the dark web forum Ramp, a threat actor publicly posted that they were selling 5 terabytes of data from a ransomware attack related to Security. They advertised that the data contained customer, financial, confidential documents, infrastructure, network data, and then they actually provided this news link as proof and offered it for 100 Bitcoin. They got banned within, I think, about 6 hours on Ramp, which is a very, very small forum. It's a kind of small, closed ecosystem there. And then they went on and posted on the dark web forum XSS. They got banned there, and then they went on and posted on the dark web forum breach forums, where they were also banned. There were some really odd things about this whole sequence of events. First of all, 100 Bitcoin is a lot of money. Even when you see really valuable infrastructure, access to financial services companies, even access to cryptocurrency companies being sold on the dark web, you're usually looking at maybe $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 at the extreme high end, and the vast majority of listings sell for way lower. So going for maybe 43 times some of the high end posts is a very extreme amount. And this wasn't even selling active access. This was just selling 5 terabytes of data. The second thing is the cybernewsint.com is not a real news site. It was actually registered last month, and there was only one story on it, which was about security. The actor was a veteran, so it's not like this was a new actor who just got on and happened to hit a company in Russia and then realized, oh no, I did something I wasn't supposed to. Like, this actor had been on these forums for several years. This is not they absolutely would have known that this was not an acceptable thing to do. And the leak size, and I think this is one of the most interesting points, if you look at the first post on Ramp, and then you look at the last post on breach forums, the breach size went mysteriously from 5 terabytes to 4 terabytes, which I think is very strange and could indicate that somebody purchased part of the leak, or that even the victim purchased part of the leak, or that they decided not to sell part of the leak for some reason. It's very unclear. Matthew, is there anything you would like to add here?
No, or they exaggerated the size of the leaks on the first post as well. So that's kind of also like, I mean, it's, but still, it's still considered a large amount of money. I think the interesting part is really kind of this country, and I'll let you continue the story because I don't want to interrupt you there.
So a few hours later, we see Lockbit post. So I'm going to read this in case it's difficult to read for people on the screen. But this is Lockbit support, which is the main account that Lockbit engages on XSS with. And this post was on XSS, which is a Russian language hacking forum. This company was attacked by a leaked builder. So Lockbit Black, which is a version of Lockbit's ransomware code, was leaked last year. I want to say it was either 2022 or 2023. So there is a version of Lockbit that is available to threat actors without necessarily needing to pay Lockbit directly. That's the key moral of the story. Here is a note that was given to me by the employees of the company, referring to Security. Judging by the note, the attacker is very cunning and clever. Thanks to him, I learned a new service for anonymous communication without leaving traces on the internet. Not like these talks and panels with chat rooms on Tor. I wish you guys from Security to not get upset. Now you will be stronger and more serious about security. Even Accenture got pen tested and nothing live somehow. So first of all, I think it's always funny to see ransomware groups will often refer to themselves as pen testing. They'll kind of act like they're like white hat good guys who are trying to help companies. And then Lockbit posted the ransom note from Security. The first and most interesting piece about this specific instance is that there is a ransom note, right? If we look back at this previous slide, he's selling something for 100 Bitcoin, which is absolutely absurd. He's created a fake news site to advertise that this one specific breach, and he's doing something that he knows is going to get him banned. So the obvious conclusion would be this was a fake breach. But here we have Lockbit saying, no, this was real, and the employees of the company actually provided me the ransom note. So that's a major, it's very strange. It's a strange kind of sequence of events. Then a few hours later, we get this post. Guys, I found out who arranged all this. It is a stupid and ridiculous revenge of one of the competitors under the nickname Signature on the forum Exploit. He is also the owner of the affiliate Clop. He avenges me in this way for the ban on the Exploit forum. As you all remember, he had claims from the leaders of other affiliates which are no longer there. For unproven scam with me, he did not work this out, and he was banned for refusal to go through the guarantor, which is a lot of the dark web forums will actually act as guarantors of the transaction. So if you're buying access, selling access, even carrying out an attack, you can basically have a trusted middleman who can verify that whatever happened was successful. It may not necessarily be his exact identity. Perhaps you know his old nicknames and any crypto transactions, all of which may help me find him. If anyone in the FSB or FBI knows his identity, please provide me with that information. Not for free in EOX before you arrest him. I'm sure someone knows his identity for sure. So now he's essentially offering a bounty for the identity of the person who of the original actor who breached AN security. Now, where this is really interesting is so Lockbit's basically disavowing. He's saying this wasn't me. This was somebody using Lockbit Black Builder and kind of framing Lockbit for the attack by trying to sell this on dark web forums. And if we go back to our inconsistency slide, it's really interesting, right? So this whole post seems kind of designed to make noise. He posted it on 3 different forums: Ramp, Exploit, and XSS. Or sorry, Ramp, XSS, and Breach forums. He's selling for 100 Bitcoin, which is, I think, more than any transaction I've ever seen on any dark web forum. He's created a fake news site to try to boost the legitimacy of his listing. And he's offering 5 terabytes of data for a Russian company. So what does Lockbit think is happening here? Who needs God? Who needs me, God? Even the FBI website. So he basically ups the reward. So Lockbit has had this personal bounty on himself, where if anybody can message him his real name on one of these forums, he'll give them $1 million. He ups it to $10 million and also reiterates that he'll provide a bounty for somebody who tells him who the actor is who's trying to frame him. You'll also see that this is probably one of my favorite parts of the post. He quotes Alex778, who says, "This is a very fat and very old St. Petersburg PSC, private security company, from the dashing 90s. Whether it is so fat that Citizen Lockbit will now be poisoned with polonium, if you know what I mean. I don't know. Everything is possible. It definitely looks like a setup." So the general conclusion that Lockbit and many of the users of these forums reached is that Lockbit was being set up by this actor who was claiming to be affiliated with Lockbit and essentially use Lockbit's code. So what does this tell us? Ransomware is a competitive ecosystem. We often see Tor forums and marketplaces regularly DDoS each other in order to drive traffic to the owner's site. We may have just seen a ransomware group or another individual. There's no evidence that it was Clop beyond what Lockbit claimed, try to weaponize the Russian state and FSB against another group. And I will say this is speculative. This is what Lockbit claims happened. We don't know this for sure. It could have been anybody. It could have not even been an attempted setup. It's not entirely clear, but it is a really interesting example. There is one inviolable rule among threat actors operating on these forums and operating on these ransomware groups that was very clear from this, which is don't target companies in CIS countries. What's strange, there's a lot of inconsistencies in the story. Why did AN security feel the need, or why did the threat actor who targeted AN security feel the need to create a fake news site when the breach seems to have been real? How was Lockbit able to easily get a ransom note from AN security? Does Lockbit know people at AN security? Why did somebody target a company in a CIS country to begin with? And why would you try to sell it for 100 Bitcoins when I think that might be one of the highest transactions that's ever been listed on one of these forums? Matthew, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
It's yes, but again, just kind of like bearing with us that this is still at the point where we don't have a lot of information and no validation on whatsoever. We're more into like what could happen based on the insertions we see and what we've seen historically happening in the illicit ecosystem. I mean, it's not like to your point that you did before, that you did at the beginning of the talk, we really see kind of a like 3 affiliate programs that are really strong and actually are competing against one against the other. And in terms of what are the top 2, I would say it's probably Lockbit and Clop. So you kind of see like kind of a race for the first, the pole position in term the Lockbit as in term of like the ransomware group affiliate. So it sounds a little bit like this. I think the reason why actually they don't target CIS countries because they usually, and that's kind of a saying in cybersecurity, is like you don't get in trouble with the government there if you don't target the CIS country. So the reason why, the main reason why is you can run your business as usual as long as you target CIS country. You won't necessarily get into trouble into that part of that part of the world. So like setting up another group that actually break that rule, it's actually tied up to what you describe of like putting attention of one or multiple government into the top leader. I mean, Lockbit is still on, like, unfortunately, like the most prolific ransomware group that we see at the moment. So basically putting the spotlight on that group in order to affect that group in order to take the pole position. So the club could make sense. There's, I mean, I don't think at that point it's considered being like a mistake of Lockbit or like just a problem of the affiliate. It take too much proportion to be that. I wouldn't think that that is a case of like just a honest mistake from one of the affiliate. But like you see, it's kind of a complex system. The other thing that is interesting and to tie it back is the fact that this is allowed as well because of the leak version of the tooling of Lockbit. So it leave evidence as well on a company that looks like to be the TTP of Lockbit. That being said, TTPs evolve all the time. So what I'm curious to see and see what's going up later is like the TTP that are going would, maybe we'll never know, but what are the TTP that are being used to get into the company? Are they considered like the TTP that's seen into the most recent toolkit of Lockbit, or the more TTPs and method that we've seen into the older package of the Lockbit toolset? So that's kind of that will probably get us a little bit more information about whatever it's an affiliate that did a mistake, which I doubt it's the case, or someone that was framing a little bit Lockbit as much as possible in order to put them in spotlight. So that's kind of that's kind of my view on that. Unfortunately, it's still on the ongo. Like we don't have all the information. I hope we'll get more information about that going in the next week. But for now, it's still a little bit speculative, at least as we can say at the moment.
I will generally say if you look at the forums where all of this discussion is going on, most of the users of the forums believe Lockbit was being set up, which is I think there's like this very interesting dynamic here because it was very clumsy in a way. Like it's almost like too obvious. 5 terabytes of data that randomly just goes down to 4 terabytes of data for 100 bitcoins from the only Russian company that's been targeted out of 3,500. It's not exactly subtle. So I'm gonna. That's kind of there's a part 2 to this story though, and it's kind of a continuation rather than maybe a second act.
Yep.
But less than a week later, so most of this happened last Monday and Tuesday. Early this week, there was actually Lockbit got banned. So the Lockbit support account got banned from XSS, which is one of the major dark web forums that they regularly posted on. And the reason they got banned is that an access broker was complaining that Lockbit had scammed him. Now, there's a really interesting dynamic here. So I'm going to start by just explaining what an initial access broker is because it is highly relevant for those who don't know. So initial access brokers are kind of a certain class of dark web threat actors, and essentially what they specialize in is getting access and establishing persistence to corporate IT environments, which they then go on to auction off on 2 or 3 different forums: XSS, Exploit, and Ramp primarily. So you'll hear those 3 forums over and over again in most kind of like cybercrime and threat intelligence talks. And so we see probably, I would say, an average of 500 to 1,000 IAB posts a year is a really good like rough estimate across all 3 of those. Although there's also almost certainly a lot of initial access brokers who just sell directly. So these are the forum posts that we see that go public in kind of an auction format. There's also IABs who undoubtedly have existing relationships with groups like Lockbit or like Clop, and they just sell the access directly to them, and it never goes on a forum. It's usually done through encrypted messaging. So Lockbit got banned, which is really, so that by itself is extremely interesting, because you have the top ransomware group getting banned from probably what's tied for the top dark web forum. It's a like fairly unusual event, and obviously both, so XSS itself is a Russian forum, and then Lockbit is almost certainly a Russian group. So what exactly happened? So an initial access broker posted more than a dozen pages of message logs between themselves and Lockbit on XSS, claiming that they had been scammed. So the initial access broker themselves are very interesting. So they essentially gave Lockbit access to a bunch of companies without establishing the price, what Lockbit was going to pay for this access. And then Lockbit turned around and said, "Okay, well, you've given me the access. Here's the terms." You'll also see that Lockbit leveraged that access. So he was actually able to, or they were actually able to leverage this, break into companies. And my favorite one was including one classy access. I have no idea what if this is like a good translation of the Russian. This is what GPT-4 gave me, but it's a classy access, which I'm assuming is a large or more valuable company than the other ones. So I'm going to pause here for a moment because there's another really interesting point here. Lockbit wasn't actually buying these to distribute the ransomware themselves. The Lockbit was buying the ransomware to give to affiliates. So this goes back to the conversation Matthew and I were having earlier, where this isn't necessarily about Lockbit making more money directly, but this is almost like an incentive for affiliates, kind of like in B2B marketing and sales, you'll see like companies will advertise like, "Oh, become a partner with us and we'll give you leads." It's a little bit of the same concept where Lockbit is buying initial access to then distribute to affiliates as probably a retention scheme, I guess would be the easiest way to say it. So his affiliates don't go, or their affiliates don't go to Clop or Black Cat or one of these other groups. Following a misunderstanding on payment due to the initial intent of the access broker of simply selling rather than leveraging it, the broker leaked their conversation on a dark web forum. So the broker wanted to be compensated directly for the access. So regardless of the successful or unsuccessful outcome of the ransoms, Lockbit wanted to pay a percentage fee on the ransoms. And so this was the disagreement. And because the access broker had given the access to Lockbit without actually coming to terms, they felt that they had been scammed.
Yeah. An interesting part, as Eric, is like Lockbit only wants to pay if one of the access provided actually convert to a successful payment of the ransomware ransom as well. So Lockbit also wants to have an agreement where they say, well, we'll take the access to the company, we'll try to exfiltrate data, we'll try to create pressure on it, and if that company paid a ransom, in that case, we'll pay the commission for your initial access broker, for your initial access to the company.
Which is pretty funny, because if we go back to the analogy I made with B2B marketing and sales, you'll sometimes see partners say like, "Oh, I'll sign up, but I don't want to pay anything until I'm able to sell it. Then I'll pay." So it's a bit of this disagreement of like, well, do you pay upfront for the leads, or do you pay if you're able to sell the leads, or in their case, distribute ransomware? I will say, on another note, having read a lot of the posts on the forum, it's 6 pages, so I actually haven't had time to get through all of it because this was fairly recent. But it's amazing how it just resembles like typical kind of forum drama you would see in any community. Like you have this huge initial post with all the logs. It's about 13 pages if you put it into a Google Doc. And then you just have pages and pages of users like highlighting different pieces of the logs, arguing like, "Oh, like Lockbit's right in this circumstance," or "the initial access broker is right." And it's the initial access broker who originally posted all these logs because they felt that they had been scammed. So go ahead, Matthew, please.
No, I think I think the interesting part is like what's happened after the 7th company, because the initial access broker actually claimed you can provide way more, and this is where it gets interesting as well, in terms of number of access you can provide. So I don't want to spook you, Eric. I'll let you jump to the next.
No, that's quite okay. Please feel free to interject. So I think the first and most interesting point out of all of this is that Lockbit is buying initial access to distribute to affiliates. We've typically assumed that affiliates were kind of responsible for getting their own infections, right? Because what's the point of having affiliates if you're giving them the access, you're also giving them the ransomware? I mean, it's getting to a point where there's not, the ransomware provider is taking a certain cut out of it for a lot of the effort. But it's very interesting too, because one of the things you'll see in the chat logs, and we actually plan to open source and publish all the chat logs in English in the future, but one of the things you'll see in the chat logs is that Lockbit almost wants to delegate the access based on the competency of the affiliates. So they said, for example, that one of the initial access companies that had been compromised had a really advanced endpoint detection and response system. And so Lockbit was wanting to give that to a top tier affiliate who wasn't online, who was very experienced, because they considered it a more difficult target. While as another one used kind of a more well-known generic antivirus, and that company, he said, "Oh, I can just give this to," or they said that I can just give this to any affiliate. So that there was this concept of, the value of the potential target, the difficulty of the attack, and then distributing this to various affiliates based on their level of competency. The other thing I think that was kind of noteworthy is the affiliate had been scammed before and was looking to privately sell bulk access to organizations. So the affiliate had mentioned that they had given access to other actors in the past, and the actors had claimed the access didn't work and they hadn't ended up getting paid. And so this is an area where I think it's really demonstrative of the point that initial access brokers probably often are looking for some kind of bulk person to sell to so that they can de-risk things. Because if they have somebody to sell to in bulk, even if it's a lower price that they can get in auctions, they reduce the risk of themselves being scammed. They create kind of like this cash flow where they know how much it's going to sell for, they know they have a buyer, etc. And then from Lockbit's perspective, this is a great retention tool for all of their affiliates, where they can just continually provide them with new opportunities to infect companies with ransomware, where one of the hardest pieces is already done. Mathieu, is there anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, and also it's the interesting part I find it on the business side of thing is like the amount of commission that Lockbit is willing to give to the initial access broker is similar to the commission you actually get from the infection. So meaning that Lockbit doesn't make a lot of money doing that. It's really just kind of incentivizing their top affiliate, because let's say the commission on Lockbit for negotiation is 20%, and they are giving like close to that to the initial access broker's provider. So in the end, it's not the most lucrative in terms um, of business for the ransomware group, in order to, because they have a cost associated with providing initial access broker to the top affiliate. But they, like, what we can read between the line is there's really kind of a challenge and really kind of a competition between the different affiliate programs to keep their top performer freelance that infect most of the company. So you really see there's like all this kind of a dynamic of not just, it's not necessarily like it's somewhat of the same people are moving around between the different affiliate programs, and there's strong competition. It's not like we open up a program, is there like a lot of people coming in. So I think there's probably a lot of affiliate that tried are not successful, and I think there's probably like a smaller amount of affiliate that actually are successful in establishing a persistent company and extracting data and actually being able to achieve that. So that's kind of a show the importance for those groups to, with the affiliate programs, to be able to keep the specialized resources into their own program, which is interesting because it tied up a lot to, as Rick mentioned, like reality you can see into the legitimate economy as well.
And Mathieu, what do you think this? So, we've gone through a lot of information here. What does this tell you about the future of ransomware, or at least the near future, maybe, of ransomware? So the next year.
Honestly, I think it's tied up to one of the reflections we did of like it seems kind of a plateau, and I think this is a little bit where my comments went. If like there's probably like the number of groups are not necessarily as growing as it was before. We see more group popping in, but we see as more like going down. So we see kind of a stabilization of number of actor being involved. I am not saying that the number of infection will reduce. My hypothesis is there will be probably kind of this pool of criminal that is actually stable. And the other things that I'm looking to see is it's more like an analogy to the illicit market in 2017. So like remember when you have like Alphvm, you have Dream Markets, um, you had like RS clubs, you have all of those market that were kind of a Toka as well, that was kind of in the top contender of the market. And like Alphabet and Dream were there for a long time, and at some point there was a movement in the market when we see more like Empire popping up and other type of market. And I sense that there's some parallel to be done here, like that we're getting to a point where we have strong established groups, we have some contender, and we're kind of at the point where what I'm would expect to see more disruption in terms of like the organization of those group and the scale of those group of like in terms of like this is group number 1, number 2, number 3, like the leaderboard. I think we'll see probably in like it's a similar situation that we've seen with market since 2017, with everything was stable and defined with the top market leader. I feel that we are somewhat in the same situation in terms of ransomware groups, where historically what happened with the market that it was like a fall down of those top leader and like a lot of like fragmented ecosystem into the illicit market that honestly haven't survive out of it. Like the illicit markets are not necessarily as important as they were like late 2019, like late 2018, 2019, or early 2020. What we see of actually what happened is a shift toward a different system, which was more like Telegram. So
And
I'm
Talks would be the other one I would mention. Is a lot of people, a lot
yes.
of actors are using Talks for like peer-to-peer encrypted communication.
Yeah, but what I'm saying with Telegram is there's more like market capacity on Telegram than on Talks, as Talks is more like probably like kind of the evolution of Jabber that we see historically being used by malicious actor. But what I'm trying to see is I think we are, and I mean it's I don't like maybe I'll listen to that like 5 months down the road and I say I was totally wrong. But one hypothesis that I have, or one prediction that I have, is we'll see probably some kind of a change in the form of the ransomware group as we see right now. And I'm expecting some kind of a like turbulence in like the established group in the ransomware ecosystem. I mean, it's a huge. Don't hold me accountable for that prediction. That's kind of a long shot, but that's something that I may expect to see.
I think one of the other trends that I would note here, Matthew, that is particularly interesting to me is you do see this increasing sophistication where different parts of the ecosystem are working together. So you have in this case, you have initial access brokers. You probably have Stealer logs, although it's obfuscated, right? We don't know for a fact where the initial access broker got their access from, but Stealer logs is not a terrible guess. And then you also have a ransomware group that's buying initial access to then distribute to affiliates. So you have like all of these different kind of individual segments of this cybercrime ecosystem across Telegram, across Talks, across multiple dark web forums, operating in concert to be able to carry out successful attacks. And so one of the questions that I think a lot of people have had, and that it's a good question, is like, what is causing this dramatic spike in double extortion ransomware attacks, in data breaches, and cybercrime generally? And I think it's like fairly indisputable that there is a large spike. And one of the theory, like my personal theories, is you just see this coordination among different elements of the cybercrime ecosystem in a way that's enabling them to leverage kind of these traditional economics concepts like economies of scale, like role specialization, right? It's much more efficient to have a factory that produces boots than an artisan who like handcrafts like every part of a boot. And you're kind of seeing this same thing in the cybercrime ecosystem where there's so much money involved. There's so much opportunity to make money for threat actors off of ransomware and off of Stealer logs and off of getting initial access, that it's really becoming like the specialized ecosystem where you have like certain threat actors who specialize in building info stealer malware. Then you have threat actors who specialize in the infections and then monetizing it. Then you have initial access brokers who are buying the monetized stealer logs and finding corporate access. And then they sell that to a ransomware group who then gives it to ransomware affiliates who then actually carry out the attacks to share money back with the ransomware group.
Mm-hmm. No,
And
I
so
think
there's this whole complicated supply chain going on.
yes, and I think like to the point of like I think relationship like business relationship between amongst different party of the chain are being established are not necessarily like we'll still see some like listings or people advertising for some services or looking for some services, etc., etc. But I think for what you described, most of the established actors actually have like, their own way of actually their own go-to person for the different service or product you need to buy. That being said, to one point, like you mentioned, Eric, that they're not necessarily evidence like how initial access broker actually look for like are they using stealer logs. One thing that we've seen in and it's one example that I think it speak to your point of like we see one initial access broker on Explode.io was actually advertising and looking for private stealer logs. So like logs, stealer logs that are is able to buy at bulk, and the only requirement of this actor is you don't sell it to anyone else. Like you do infection, you package them, and you sell it only to me, and I want to be the only person to have access to those. So you see, again, kind of a similar approach where, yes, it validates that some of the initialized worker actually wanted to have some logs. They wanted to have the only one to have those logs because they don't want to have like noise on the line of other people kind of trying
Using
to
the
leverage
access.
those. Exactly. And also, like, they're basically looking for like direct relationship of in Stilo log provider.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. One of the things you'll also see in the switching to a different type of logs, the logs pages between Lockbit and the provider is one of them. I forget which one mentioned like, oh, well, how many times has this access been sold? I think it was Lockbit asking him like, have you sold this access to other people, 4 or 5, 6 people? Because Lockbit wanted to validate that the access was real. And I think that's another good point, right? Is you're selling often information or information that allows you to access other information, and it's very difficult to to guarantee that the same actor hasn't sold that to a bunch of different people. And so for all of the posts we probably see publicly on forums like XSS and Exploit and on Telegram channels and conversations, there's probably innumerable more conversations and discussions and sales through private channels that are completely invisible. So I think we're, the iceberg analogy for the dark web is very overplayed. But even if you're looking at the dark web, you're probably only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of what actually is going on, where there's a huge amount going on below the surface that's just not visible to any company.
Or only see the result at the end, basically the infection being the successful infection and the successful disclosure of information by a malicious actor. So, yeah.
Yep. Well, with that, Matthew, I think that this was a great discussion. Do we have any questions? Oh, we do have some questions. Do we have a subscription for students? Unfortunately, we do not have a subscription for students at the moment. What are we doing to prevent, monitor, bring your own network attacks like OMG cables, bash bunnies? And I'll let Matthew answer that one.
Well, I mean, it's not related to ransomware. Like what we are describing here is like cable that you plug into like USB-C or in USB or like any type of ports that actually will either simulate attacks or like simulate keystroke to some extent as well. So I mean, it's more like physical attack. Like it's not necessarily related to cybercrime. Those type of tools. I mean, there are great red teaming tools. If you're a red teamer, you should look up these tools, and they're super helpful. I think what you basically, what is the outcome is just a different way to get to compromisation of a workstation or an appliance within a company. So it should be, I mean, like it's just a different way of getting like persistence or access within a company. So how can it relate to what we do at Flare? Well, first of all, we were looking for like evidence of like workstation appliance being compromised or being shared among cyber criminal. So I mean, we will not be able to tell you if it's due to like a phishing attack that actually ends up being like a malicious attachment that was opened up and doing it was actually a steal logs or infect the machine or establish persistence or etc. But what we'll be able to provide is like evidence that there was a compromission to this machine or workstation, and unfortunately, we won't be able to tell you if it was related to a bash bunny or it was related to phishing to phishing attack or like any other like reusing of password, etc. So that's kind of a I not necessarily related to cybercrime, but what I can say is like it's just an additional infection vector that you should look into. That could lead to compromission of workstation or appliance or any things that run code within your organization.
All right. Well, with that, thank you so much for any of the people who are watching. We really appreciate the couple of questions we got, and we hope you enjoyed the live stream. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you. Have a good one.